Hello and welcome to this installment of AACRAO's Credential Chats. And we are joined this week by Dr. Linda Vazquez. She is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for State and Federal Relations at the California Community College's Chancellor's Office. Dr. Vazquez, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Noah.
Absolutely. Well, we're really excited, partially because you're in the chancellor's office. You have this role that is not necessarily normal for this show and for ACRA members. And, I think what you have to share is very relevant to, our topics and our work, especially given that you recently contributed a chapter entitled Policy Matters, Influencing Institutional, State, and Federal Higher Education Policy to Accelerate Change. And that was to ACRA's new book on learning mobility. So thank you in advance for that contribution and for being willing to share with us today on Credential Chats. And so maybe just a kind of starting place is, if you could just sort of give us a high level, what brought you to write that chapter and how is that your passion to share with us?
Well, I was really honored to be invited to contribute this chapter. I mean, I think it blends my personal passion and experience of almost 20 years working in higher education and policy advocacy. And in my role here at the Chancellor's Office, representing 116 community colleges, such a large state from the northern, tip of California and Redding to the southern tip in San Diego, a recognition that the policy contributions of every stakeholder are very important to inform decisions that impact our entire state. And so I was really excited to kind of bring that perspective to the chapter.
And I love that it's coming from a place of passion for you because I definitely share that and it's magnetic. I think people could just sense it from you that you care. Um, and so when, for you coming from, such a, 30,000 foot view for supporting over 100 campuses statewide, when you think about policy and learning mobility, why is that something that needs to be on the radar? That this like kind of and learning and mobility are words we know, but put together,
Yeah.
that's the it's kind of a new thing that's shiny and new. And why is that important to be thinking about from a policy perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the students that higher education is serving is evolving. I mean, and think about the students that we served 10 years ago are very different, 20 years ago, 30 years. I think as institutional leaders, it's really important that we bring that continuous improvement mindset. We teach that in our courses, right? It's important pedagogy, but it's also an important mindset for policy advocates to think that as you're responding to legislation or responding to the political or policy trends, that you remember who you're serving, who you remember you're advocating for. And so this book about supporting the highly mobile learner is with students in mind, but you can take this mindset and think about how we're supporting faculty, how we're supporting staff, how we're supporting parents. So the I mean 10, 15 years ago, actually even just a few years ago, we were talking a lot about the non-traditional learner, and I've been pleased to see the evolution of how we view and talk about the non-traditional learner. I mean, the non-traditional learner, the older adult, the parent, the one who stopped out and took a break between high school and re-enrolled in college, that's honestly today's learner. And I love how ACRA was really stepping into this term as a highly mobile learner, and that really is who we are. And so the chapter I write a little bit about not just how we need to start embracing the picture of the highly mobile learner, but also remembering the statistics, right? The vast majority of our learners, especially in community colleges, are working adults. They're balancing multiple responsibilities. They're parents, and some of them come with some college experience. And when you know that, when you know the profile of the student that you're supporting, the racially diverse student, right, then we're in a better position to create programs that best fit their needs. That has, and just to tell you a little bit about me, I mean, I've been working in higher ed for almost 20 years, but I started my work in student services. So while I do have right now sort of a 30,000 foot perspective, I started on the ground as a student advisor, as a student support specialist, I created culturally relevant college prep information for parents. I work with national organizations. And I think that those experiences have provided me with a pretty well-rounded view around policy making at all different levels within an institution and within the state and federal government.
And thank you so much, Dr. Vasquez, for naming this misnomer, if you will, of the, non-traditional learner, when statistically speaking, that is the supermajority of learners, that the quote unquote traditional learner is actually, increasingly an outlier. And so I really appreciate you naming that. And I think that also speaks to this notion of learning mobility, that, learning needs to be as mobile as learners. And today's learner is highly mobile. And, I think where we see ACRA leadership getting so involved is because when we think about, learning being as mobile as the learners, it comes down to learning records. And so the keepers of the records who ensure that they are trusted, verifiable, and accurate, are really important partners, we think, in ensuring that, learning records are just as mobile as the learners need them to be, which I think is probably a great segue for us to get into maybe some specifics of what you write about in the chapter, and just the passion you bring to this work. In the title of the chapter, you call out that policy is not a monolith, that that there's federal policy, which is in this moment in time very much in the front of a lot of our minds in higher ed, but also state policy and institutional level policy. And so specific to an AACRAO audience, when you think about officers of the registrar, enrollment management professionals, where are some entry points and just things that you would encourage this audience to really be thinking about their role, responsibility, and opportunities for involvement when it comes to these kind of this three-legged stool of policy engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so higher education, and I do talk about this in the chapter, is one of the most highly regulated entities. And I mean, there are layers and layers of policy, yes, to the very top, and federal law and regulations and expectations for how you use funding, to state law and policies and accreditation. But even within an institution, if you just think of an institution as an ecosystem, there are also multiple layers of policy making. So, as people, think about ways to get involved and they see government relations or they think law, I think, oh, that's intimidating or not for me. There's so many ways that you can get involved in policy. And if you want to start somewhere, your institution is a great place before you dig into like law, although that is an area where we definitely need enrollment management perspective, admissions and records. But at the institution, I mean, right now, especially post-pandemic, we're 5 years after the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think institutions are starting to recover from enrollment declines, and all eyes have been on enrollment trends. We may be at the height of a recession or in the beginning stages of a recession. So policymakers, institutional leaders will look to enrollment management leaders. They will look to admissions and records to paint a picture, right? The data in admissions and records could be used to inform policy decisions. Where are we headed in the next 5 years? What does our enrollment look like? What are the steps within admissions and records that may be a barrier for students? What keeps, even if it's technical through an application or requiring paper forms over online, do those things pose a barrier for our students? Is there an enrollment in particular programs that are in more demand, or there are programs that are impacted? These are the questions that a lot of policymakers are asking. And when we have answers to these questions, especially in real time, it informs real-time policy. So if you're listening to this and you are, a professional within admissions and records or enrollment management, just know that your role right now is so, so important. And so if you are in a committee on campus, make sure you're chiming in because people want to hear what you have to say. Be someone who's known to bring solutions and not just problems. If you're going to bring a problem, bring a solution with it. Right. I'm a big believer in putting your foot forward and making space for yourself. Because if there is a problem you want to elevate, you want to share that with your colleagues and other departments too, not just an administrator, although you definitely want to bring in your administration, but share your observations, your ideas with your colleagues in financial aid. with your student support programs. I see far too often that departments are working in silos, and there's no more important time for us to be working together, singing the same tune than now, because our students are really counting on us.
And I don't know if you got a hold of my diary, but ecosystem is my one word for the year. So I love that that's where you took it. And I hear you, really advocating for, especially a lot of us in post-secondary in, highly decentralized bureaucracies and, in environments where silos can be really common. And I almost hear you advocating for, our audience to, give themselves permission to break down those silos, that it's actually part of policy and part of advocacy to be involved locally in informal ways, that those can actually be really powerful policy advocacy moves at the institutional level to go ahead and seek out those opportunities to, as you said, put that foot forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when are silos a good thing? Right? And it's when you know that a silo is keeping us from moving forward, keeping us from being innovative and solving the problems of today, someone's got to do something about it. And if in your institution that kind of culture is not there, or um, uh, breaking down those silos or building bridges is just not part of that culture, then I understand what kind of position you may be in. And especially if you're the only one trying to change things, that's not an easy thing to do. And so what I would say, if that is where you find yourself, is there are limitless ways in which you can be involved in shaping policy. You just got to find it. Is that in a committee that you're in, you've been invited? I mean, community colleges, especially but higher ed, operates in the system of shared governance, or and it looks very different at every institution, but we've got shared governance, and that's how we make decisions. So there are committees and committees, maybe a little bit too many committees, but there are spaces, and you just have to find the place that works best for you. And the important thing to know is that you got to start somewhere, right? Maybe this year and this phase of your work, you're contributing in a small committee. Later on, you're maybe appointed to a statewide committee. There are statewide, and I do talk about this in my book, in the chapter, is that there are statewide commissions that you can be appointed to. You can apply for them, or someone can nominate you. And then you work your way up. You'll find quickly as you get involved in this space whether or not you like it, because this is not for the impatient person. I will say, if you're really interested in shaping policy, you have to think about the long game, right? What is the change you're really hoping to seek? And that's not going to happen overnight, especially for institutions of higher education that are not known to move quickly. But there are things that you can do to start influencing change, right? Maybe this one year you're focused on building educational awareness about a particular problem. And the next 2 or 3 years, maybe your goal is to start educating people about a policy change that may lead to a bill. But just think about the long term, because once you start thinking about the long term, you can take small wins that can ultimately lead to a big win.
Yeah, these committees that you mentioned, getting involved in state level work groups and advising groups. And one thing that, we hear time and again is once you say yes, once you start to, your name's out there and all of a sudden you get realize how many of these opportunities there are because they need people to say yes and to lend their time and expertise. And for I kind of had to smile a little bit that you talk about the importance of patience. When your chapter has the word accelerate change in it, and I kind of hear you saying that at the same time, part of accelerating change is to stop getting ready and get started.
Part of accelerating change is to get started, absolutely, but also to have a plan, right?
Mm.
So I mean, chances are is that if you are actively engaged in a council or a committee like AACRAO, an organization, like you're bringing something already to the table, whether that's your thoughts about things that need to change, or maybe you want to be the person to constantly remind people, hey, we're supporting mobile learners, do these policies not support them, right? Or are we still operating in a structure that only supports full-time first-time students, right? That's so if you're the one that is serving the role of constantly reminding people, that's important too, right? So chances are, like, you're coming to this space because you want to contribute something, maybe, or even if you want to learn something, when you're phasing or you're transitioning to, you want to contribute something. And it's just a matter of finding what it is that you want to contribute and how to contribute it. And there are things that you can mobilize and do immediately, like an educational awareness campaign. I talk about this in the chapter. There are some organizations that do that very, very well. And honestly, if you're interested in influencing policy, you have to build the educational base first. That's accelerating change. And if you're looking to mobilize folks for a bill, that cannot happen in a month or overnight. That at a minimum will take a year or a few years. But when you think in the grand scheme of things, that we're operating under, for example, the Higher Education Act has been around for decades. And you're mobilizing change, let's say even in the next 5 years, that's still fast. I mean, it may not be enough, I think, for some people who want change now, but to mobilize change in 5 years, recognizing that we're operating on a federal bill program that's been around for 60 years, that's great, right? So the perspective really matters as you're thinking about policies that you want to change and ways to get involved.
That is just such a great call to action to end on. Dr. Linda Vazquez, the Assistant Vice Chancellor of State and Federal Relations in the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office. And again, it is chapter, I believe, 7 in AACRAO's brand new Learning Mobility, Empowering Educational Journeys Beyond Traditional Pathways. Uh, it is available free for AACRAO members to download. We'll give the link in our show notes. Dr. Vazquez, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us.
Thank you for having me. And I got lucky number 7, chapter 7.
There we go. Thank you so much, and have a badge-worthy week, everybody. So long.